Well, it's 4:00.
Compared to
Shall we
us.
begin?
Yeah. Using local
Give you a
clean
thumbs up. We go for it.
instead of this whole thing.
We told it said.
Been taking the film.
Oh, no.
I know.
We'll bring our meeting to order. Welcome to the January 22nd meeting of the Liberty Lake Planning Commission. Let's go ahead with roll call first, please.
Hey. Joe Mand,
Here.
Tom Solberg,
Here.
Jim Baumkert,
Here.
DG Garcia,
Here.
Charlie Jenks,
Here.
Dale Robbins,
Here.
Phil Foyer,
Here.
Gene Hushel, Troy Mullen.
Here.
Thank you.
And Commissioner, I'm drawing a blank. Hush is out of the country. I would entertain a motion to excuse him from the meeting. Second. Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Would you please stand and join me with Pledge of Allegiance, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We'll review the agenda. Does anyone have any changes or additions to the agenda? Entertain a motion for approval. Move to approve. Commissioner Jenks, approve. Second. Second, Commissioner Foyer and Commissioner Robbins. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Thank you. Minutes from the last meeting, January 8th. Any changes, additions, or issues with the entertain a motion to approve? Move to approve. Commissioner Jenks, thank you.
Second.
Mr. Solberg, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Workshops, recap of our land capacity analysis.
Yes, thank you, commissioners and chair. Because we had several people that were absent at the last meeting, it was suggested that we do a relatively quick recap. Now, you're going to have to forgive me because it's hard to recap something as wonky as this. So, but I will do my best to keep it short and brief, but it is foundational to our comp plan. So it is important that you understand it. So other than the fact that the Growth Management Act requires it, what is the purpose of the land capacity analysis, or LCA? It's number one, to demonstrate that we have adequate land capacity to support projected population growth. And number two, that we've demonstrated adequate capacity to provide housing types that are deemed to be affordable to all income levels. And how different housing types are defined as affordable is established by the Department of Commerce. So that's the basis for that. As I said, the LCA is foundational to our comp plan. It's the basis for evaluation of capacity for utilities, schools, emergency services, et cetera. It's a pretty key component. We have to have this number and then push it out to all of our partner agencies. It does inform land use. And it is an essential input to our transportation network analysis and identifying needed transportation improvements based upon our projected population. It also will inform the parks plan and the capital facilities plan. So to start out the process, we need to identify projected need from 2020 to 2046, 2020 being the census year. And so the two things that we need to do is we need to identify projected population growth. And we also need to identify the types and number of housing units needed for all income levels. Again, as I said, those housing types are defined by Commerce. Mm-hmm. So first, the population projection. So Liberty Lake's population is projected to be 21,934. This was done based upon the county-wide allocation of population. We confirmed that in terms of our own regression analysis, although I've got us hitting that about 2042. But and there's obviously there's a little bit of deviation of error. So the next thing we need to do is identify the housing need. And so this is done through the HAPT. Commerce has developed this Housing for All planning tool that basically helps convert the number of, they tell us how many households for how many people of different income levels the county will need, and then it has to be allocated amongst the cities, et cetera. We have a draft of this that has not been finalized because the county has to ultimately adopt it. But we wanted to move forward for planning purposes because this is such a foundational piece. And basically how it turned out, Liberty Lake's total allocation for 2020 to 2046, we're looking at housing allocation for 0 to 80% of the area median income at a little bit over 3,500. For the 80 to 120% of AMI is 613. And for the housing allocation for greater than 120% of the AMI is 1,100 and change. It also identifies the emergency housing beds, but because that amendment is moving through, we don't really have to do capacity analysis specifically for that, but it's a good number to know. And so again, this is the table that kind of identifies what types of housing are assumed to be affordable for which income categories. Obviously, when you get down to the low income, you really, the 0 to 80%, we're not going to achieve that except through subsidy. So there is an assumption that there would be some sort of a subsidy, not necessarily that we Liberty Lake would provide it, but this, again, this is the basis for the planning for the land capacity analysis. So once we have identified the need, we move on to identifying capacity. So we need to identify the housing by type that has been constructed in Liberty Lake since 2020. That's pretty easy. We do an annual for that, and I know exactly how many houses of each type have been constructed. We then look at entitled projects. For the purpose of this analysis, platted lots that have not yet been developed are considered entitled. Developments that are phased, that have a preliminary plat approval but have not yet had their final plats done, are also considered entitled. Binding site plans that have a specific number of housing units tied to them are considered entitled. And projects that are actually under construction are also considered entitled. So that's where we get the entitled. Next, we need to identify vacant residential and mixed use properties. And we'll do, when we do that, we actually do a hand calculation based upon the area, the zoning. If it does not have infrastructure, we provide an assumption about how much of that is going to be for road infrastructure and utilities, et cetera. And the density that's allowed by the zoning level. And then for underutilized residential properties, we go through the same process, but only for the portion of it that's not yet developed. And so what do we exclude from this capacity analysis? Public and private rights of way, open space tracts that have been platted as part of a development, public facilities, utility easements and corridors, and critical areas. So again, here's a summary of basically the housing units that have been constructed from 2020 through 2024. We've had August of 2024, we had to have a specific cutoff date. So that was 902 units. So we're well on our way already to meeting our capacity requirements. And you can see the breakdown by type. Again, these are the entitled developments. As I said, anything that's been platted that has not yet been developed, counted, and there are about 75, 76 lots that are platted that have not yet been developed throughout this. We have the portions that are unplatted. So in this one, you can see that it doesn't include Hawkstone Fifth Edition. It doesn't include the balance of Trutina. It doesn't include the balance of Legacy Ridge West or River Crossing East or River Crossing 2020. So I mean, so we don't have lots for those, but we've identified those as entitled, and we know how much is entitled for those developments. So we look at what's been platted minus what is remaining for their entitlement to get how much capacity is still remaining there. Oh, and I did also want to point out that you can see in green the Signal Point apartments that are under construction. We have permits in for Liberty Heights Apartments. We have permits in for Stanley Apartments. And the south side of the Country Vista binding site plan that was identified for multifamily is also considered entitled. I think there was 1,115 units, if I remember correctly, give or take. So these are the entitled units that we have. And again, pretty substantial, since most of what's remaining that hasn't already been developed is entitled. We've got a little over 4,200 units that have been entitled in various categories. We've got a fair bit of multifamily and condos that are entitled at this point, and that's a good thing because that really helps us meet our land capacity requirements. So the next piece of it is looking at the vacant residential and commercial. So you see the Toledo Station projects over in the River District. Those do allow for residential. It is a mixed use zone. It's principally freeway commercial, but it does allow for some multifamily, and I believe some small percentage of that has a potential to be a multifamily development. We also have some developments around the Bitterroot and the Courtyard East apartments that are owned by a trust. We think that that'll all develop as multifamily residential. We have 35 acres, the school property that's right now undergoing remediation. There's 5 acres of that that's going to actually be a park with soccer fields and a parking that's where the lead is being entombed. And but the rest of it is going to plan to be surplus, other than I believe there's 20 acres that the school district is hanging on to for a middle school and an elementary school for the future, potentially. And then we have properties that are vacant on the MTC zone, so in Meadowood Technology Campus, and those, if it has a parking lot but no structures, it was considered vacant. For those that have structures and a whole heck of a lot of parking, they were considered partially used. And then these two properties over here are the balance of the Bella Lago plat. And we've actually had some kicking the tires for Bella Lago Phase 2. They are going through the process to look at a reasonable use exception for some of the 30% slopes. I don't know if that's gonna get across the finish line or not, but they've done a fair bit of work on it, and they're looking at, I think, a total of 20 lots on that piece. And then the piece above it also is not part of that, but has the potential for, at the same density, another 10 pieces. And again, that was based upon the severe slopes. So this is the, again, this is the vacant residential mixed use land capacity. This is all in your land capacity analysis. I put some pretty detailed notes on the assumptions for how these were gonna develop. And, basically, the bottom line is that, we have a total of about 636 units that are potentially, developable, for the vacant residential mixed use land capacity. Like I said, we don't have much left. We did apply a 30% market factor. Phil, I know if you're familiar with this, that's the county's market factor. That's what's been proposed in the countywide methodology. We did not apply a market factor to that which is already entitled because it's developments that are in process, but we did apply it to the vacant and the underutilized land. And then the last is the underutilized, and honestly, for underutilized residential, that we're principally looking at, Meadowood Technology Campus. And what we did here, I literally went to each parcel, kind of identified the area on Scout, where there was, available for development, leaving adequate parking for the building that was on those sites, and then did the calculations based upon the zoning and what we've typically seen for those. There were also, in those particular cases, there was also development agreements, so some of them could be apartments, some of them could only be mixed use, vertically mixed use buildings. So those assumptions are reflected here, but there was only a handful of pieces. So now that we know how much we have and we know what the need is, we need to basically compare it. And so we're comparing total housing capacity by housing type, and then we also have to compare housing capacity to housing. So this is our housing capacity. And again, broken down by the different types of housing. And we're looking at a little bit over 5,900 units across various affordability categories. And so this is basically the bottom line, the comparison of our housing unit allocation to our housing capacity. As you can see, we are good in all categories. And so we have enough, not a lot extra, but we have enough. And then we also have to look at population capacity, which was the original charge for the Growth Management Act. And so, we're kind of doing backwards math here. So we're looking at the total housing units that we have capacity for from 2020 to 2046. We're multiplying that by the average per capita household size, and then we multiply that by the vacancy rate. These are numbers that are provided by OFM every year. I went with the 2024 numbers because they were the most recent. One of the things that's interesting is we're seeing that those numbers going down every year, both household size and also vacancy rates. So it's interesting. But bottom line is that's how we kind of compare it. And so these are the housing types that we have. And the per capita household size is based upon 2024 OFM rates, the vacancy rates, and we basically take the housing units by the household size, by vacancy rate to figure out what the population capacity is. And so we have a little more capacity than we actually are projecting for our growth. But again, our projections are based on a regression analysis. It's our best crystal ball guess. So, and the last piece of it, and this is actually kind of a useful thing, although I'm not sure what it's trying to accomplish with GMA, but we are also required to do commercial and industrial lands inventory. And so we looked at vacant and underutilized and the zoning categories and the land area. And these are the vacant properties that we have. And there is a table that shows the area. The yellow is vacant, the green is underutilized, and so we have 400 and change acres of commercial industrial land still available to be developed. So that's the land capacity analysis in a nutshell. You have questions for me?
I have one. Actually pertains to last night's council meeting. Was that a first read? Last night?
It was not, so it was just the public hearings, the first
Oh,
read's
okay,
coming
so
back.
That's why there was citizen comment. I didn't catch the question about emergency housing.
The question was whether or not, we could limit the period of tenancy for
Oh,
those.
that's what, oh, okay.
And we kind of really can't because there's, first of all, it's two different types. One is a supportive, housing, and that is transitional over by its very nature. And the other one is a temporary shelter. So it just, yeah, it
Okay.
kind of
I got-
defeats the
I caught
purpose.
Caught your answer, but it didn't quite fully get the question out there. Thank you.
Any other questions? Yeah.
I didn't catch this in the last meeting when you went over this, but if you can go back to that last table. Yes, that one right there. Understanding that we don't have an official 2024 population number, you look at that 2020 census population of 13,150.
Mhm.
Between that time and 2024, there were approximately 902 additional units added.
Yes. And
So
I
was
know-
that factored into? Because
Yes.
Okay.
It absolutely is. And one of
I
the
didn't
things-
see it on there and
I
that's why I
had
was
this
asking.
Conversation with the county because they
Yeah.
keep wanting to go from 2023 to 2046. And I've done it both ways for population. But the housing piece is from 2020 to 2046. So I was trying to keep it apples to apples.
Right.
So
Because that's a difference of about 2,000 people, which isn't a lot, but in a city our size it is.
I actually did this analysis and in fact, I did it today for the county because they're doing a summary of where people are at and I said they could use my draft numbers.
Mhm.
But they wanted to do it from 2023. And I said, okay. So we did it, from 2023. I had backed out the units that had been I backed out the units that had been constructed between 2020 and 2023.
Oh, jeez.
And then did this analysis again. And it ended up being pretty close. It was 23,980 or 90. So very, very close. The difference being that we've been seeing, like I said, and I went back and looked at this and every year the per capita has dropped a little bit and the vacancy rate has dropped a little bit. So it explains the difference, but bottom line is we, with this analysis, can demonstrate that we have capacity. With this analysis, so I'm presenting to city council on their meeting on the 4th, and I'm going to ask them to approve this for planning purposes so that we can distribute this to the school district, to the water and sewer purveyors, to Avista Utilities and et cetera, to PD, to the fire district, so that everybody has this kind of analysis to say, can we serve this population? Because that's really the next big question, right? Is, okay, so if we have the capacity for this land-wise, that's great. And zoning-wise, that's great. But do we have the capacity for it from a utility perspective? I'm actually not really concerned about that. But I do think that it's important for the water and sewer districts to be able to plan for that and for our PD and fire district to really think about what that means in the next 20 years for the services that they provide. You know that we do the network analysis. This piece has already been provided to our consultants so that they could develop it, because this is pretty key to the whole transportation analysis piece as well. So, other questions?
Just one quick question. There's nothing in here about demographics. Is there? I mean, it's not part of the process. Is that correct?
it's not part of this process. We will be talking about demographics in other parts of it, but demographics does not really have anything to do.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay, thank you.
Other than the need by income level, which is, and that's all really being driven by the state and commerce, and they're handing down the numbers to the county, and then we as a county have to play nice now amongst
Sure.
ourselves.
Any other questions? And we'll move on to critical area review.
Yeah, so this hopefully will be a little bit quicker, but this was easy and low hanging fruit. We have an on-call planning contract. It appears that we haven't really looked at our critical area ordinances in a really long time. And we did adopt a flood damage prevention ordinance in 2018, because it was, and I know that because it was one of the first ordinances I did for the city. But the rest of our critical areas have not been updated. We had the consultant who has a little bit more experience in the critical area ordinances. This is not my area of expertise. I know a little bit, but enough to be dangerous. So we had the consultant go through our critical area ordinance checklist, and which was included in your packet. And so anyhow, so let's start from the beginning. What are critical areas? They're wetlands, they're fish and wildlife habitats and conservation areas, they're geologically hazardous areas. And for most of you, probably the most other than unstable soils, et cetera, and there's a whole range of criteria for that, but what we see most commonly is that slopes in excess of 30% are considered critical areas. Frequently flooded areas. And by the way, these are regulated by City Development Code 10-6B. That's our critical areas, and 10-6F, which is our flood damage prevention ordinance. So, and critical area regulations are required by RCW 36.78.060. So we had the consultant do the checklist, and as I said, checklist was included in your packet, and surprisingly, we didn't have a lot of changes that we needed to make. Again, the regulations to protect the critical areas include designation of critical areas, definition of critical areas, protection of critical areas, and inclusion of best available science. And that's actually the best available science is the reason why we have to review these periodically, because the best available science changes over time. And so as far as I can tell, we haven't really looked at this since 2003.
But, come on, 2 or 3 corrections.
Yes, yeah, it is pretty good. But so
Pretty much.
there's some, they're minor, so we had to update some definitions for wetlands, geologically hazardous areas, fish and wildlife habitat and conservation areas, and frequently flooded areas. And I apologize for the confusion on the definitions. There are definitions located in several places. They weren't in the RCW for 2 of them, and I had to go looking for them in the WACs. And there actually was a more succinct definition for 2 of them. So that's where that came from. The other thing is that what was really out of date was our priority habitats and species table. But the solution is simple because the state maintains this. And so we just delete the table and refer them to the Fish and Wildlife's page, where they keep it up to date on a fairly regular basis. They have a mapping tool. It's lovely. We don't have to do it ourselves because there's experts to do it. So those are really the changes that we made. We have proposed, and I want to go through the definitions. The fish and wildlife habitat definition comes from WAC 365-190-0306. I'm going to read it all. You can read it. The definition for frequently flooded areas comes from WAC 365-190-030-8. geologically hazardous areas, that definition does come from the RCWs and that, and did need to be updated. And the definition for wetlands, also comes from the RCW. And, so those were the definitions that we changed. I did add a section in Article 10.6B that identifies the fact we have a new 10.6B1C that says definitions, applicable definitions, refer them back to the definitions section of our development code. Because our consultants were like, oh, you don't have that. Yes, I do. Oh, you don't have that. Yes, I do. Anyhow, the other revision was simply to, as I said, was simply to remove the table for priority habitats and species designation and provide the reference to specifically to the Fish and Wildlife's priority habitats and species on their web app. And I did include the key for that. So really, our intent with this this was low-hanging fruit. Check a box, get it out of the way. I will say that the draft CAO amendments and the checklist are deliverables for our first biennium planning periodic update grant. And so we wanted to get those out of the way. But the other thing is that, as I said, low-hanging fruit, this will now go in a folder for all of the development codes that we're going to change when we get to the end of the process. Questions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Critical area, I guess, would be, my view, aquifer recharge. How does within the area of Liberty Lake,
Almost all of the city of Liberty Lake.
almost all the city of Liberty
And
Lake,
we do have regulations in there, and I would encourage you to peruse city code section 10.6B, because we do cover it.
how do we monitor it?
How do we monitor it? Well, again, so that's a good question. So we do it through various regulations related to stormwater treatment, et cetera, with the use of 208 swales, et cetera. We do have an enforcement arm. Spokane County Aquifer Protection does handle much of it now. When that expires, and we think that it probably will, because the county can't get enough of the city of Spokane and the city of Spokane Valley don't want to piggyback on that. We know that the aquifer protection funding is going to expire, and so we, as part of our stormwater master plan, did look at that and did look at the funding for that in the future and recognize that we will have to be doing some additional enforcement actions and additional in the future. So that was.
We say we, you mean we, the city of Liberty Lake, will have to do
Yes.
enforcement action?
Yes.
When?
So not until 2026, and only if the APA ordinance does not. We included those fees as part of the financial analysis. We did include money to allow for that. We have an education piece right now on our website that refers people to other sources for that. But yeah, that is.
Do we have a stormwater system that goes to the treatment plant?
We do not, because we are using 208 swales, which is actually, that's one of the things
Mhm.
that, it's interesting because when we went through, we were gearing up for what's called an MS4 permit for discharge to waters of the state, which is generally a requirement when you reach a certain population. And we reached the population threshold, I think it's 12,500. Well, we reached that population threshold. So the reason why we got the grant to do the stormwater master plan was so that we could prepare to do that permitting. We went through the process and we were able to demonstrate that we're not discharging to the waters of the state because we have done such an effective job of incorporating 208 swales to handle our stormwater, which is a most effective way to do it.
Mhm.
And it's a very
And
environmentally sound. And least.
Least costly for sure, yeah.
There is a cost in land area, but again, it also is one of the things that helps us keep our community a little bit greener and have a little bit more open
Mhm.
space. So there's a benefit to even that trade-off.
Until you have one in your front yard, then you get one, but yeah,
Well, there's that. Yes, there's that.
well,
So, I don't have anything more on this unless anybody has any concerns with the amendments that we're making.
Lisa, I have a question.
Sure.
On page 10 on the column, I mean, on the critical checklist in the column on the right, it says anadromous. I don't know how to pronounce the word, and I certainly don't know what it means. Number 10,
I have to, give me a second because I'm trying to find it in my packet.
It's
Anadromous.
anadromous fisheries.
Yeah.
what is the word adronomous mean?
I thought it meant, fish that go from the ocean in like steelhead, salmon. Those,
Okay.
they go from saltwater to freshwater.
Great, now I understand. Thank you for the clarification.
Sure.
See, I thought it was something different. But I don't know, because there was was in the spokesman about, these, fisheries that were in nets in Puget Sound. And some of those, non-native species got outside the net. It was Atlantic salmon that were being raised in a fishery, that was an anadromous fishery.
Spawn in freshwater and migrate to the ocean, just like Joe said.
Never mind.
thanks to Google. You looking for a motion?
I don't know that I am. We'll bring this back with the other development code, unless you want to make a motion to say that
That we did it.
that we shelve it until it's time to do.
I'll make a
development
motion
code.
to recommend approval of Article 10.1C definitions and Article 10.6B critical areas as proposed.
Second,
Who's second?
Sure.
Commissioner Jinks? Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
Just looking to save future conversation.
Amen.
Awesome.
Schedule for housing element is our next item.
Yeah.
down the road.
So, I just wanted to pause for a second and share with you that we are moving quickly with the housing element. We will be having a workshop at our next planning commission meeting on the 12th. I'm going to do my best to we should have a memo with some recommendations to you all. I'll do my best to get it to you a week in advance. I'm twisting the tail of the consultants so that I can get to you and comment on it before it goes out to you. And we really have a pretty fast-paced schedule here. So February 12th, we're going to be talking about specifically housing policy. And again, on the 26th, and then we will be bringing back, in the beginning of April, the, housing and community service element with some red lines, policies, etc. So that's, so again, one of the reasons why it was so critical for us to get the LCA, we can't really talk about these things until we have that piece under our belt. So that this is the next big piece. There's going to be a lot of changes. I forewarned you that there are changes to code. There are, I saw in the legislative agenda for this session that there are at least four more housing and land use bills that are before, at least 4 more. Now, some of them may go by the wayside, we don't know, but we'll be keeping our finger on the pulse of it. We may have to revisit that again. I do know that there is movement afoot to try and get the 6-month extension. And as I said, I don't think that changes what we do. It just gives us breathing room if we something and something always goes awry when it goes awry.
The legislature's not moving very fast. I've been testifying this whole last week on community safety issues. And it's only 105-day session, so don't expect everything to go through.
I understand completely, So I just want to share that with you, that we do have, the consultant under contract. They are working on this. We've already met with them once on this. And we'll continue to, I gave them a fairly detailed scope and what staff consider to be low-hanging fruit in this arena. And so hopefully that we will, get that, going on.
Okay, we will move on to citizen comments. I understand we have a citizen here present. Just a reminder that comments are limited to 3 minutes. Your name and address, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Jeremy Jenkins. I do not live in Liberty Lake. I work for Liberty Lake Sewer and Water District as the environmental manager. I'd like to speak about the critical areas section of your development code. We appreciate the robustness of the code as it stands. It has proved very helpful in protecting our water resources amidst development around our infrastructure, which predates a lot of the development that has happened. But we have been able to coexist with that very nicely. I did hear a question about monitoring of the aquifer. I'm the president of the Spokane Aquifer Joint Board, and we are a collective of 22 water providers in the valley, including the city of Spokane. And we are investigating currently how to mitigate the potential loss of the county's robust aquifer monitoring program with the potential sunset of the APA in 2026, whether that's augmenting with water purveyors monies to keep monitoring going, or if we reduce the monitoring. In any sense, aquifer monitoring around here will not stop.
Good.
It is extremely important to keep a long-term data set running, because when we need the data and we have stopped monitoring, you can't go back in time. So it is my goal and the joint board's goal to maintain a robust monitoring program around our aquifer, because develop.
We live and die by it.
Yes. One comment about the critical areas section of the code. It does mention a critical materials list. And I think that would be a good thing to include somewhere. There's reference to it. I was unable to locate that. It's a procedural thing, but a list of that is very helpful in terms of aquifer protection.
So we do have a critical materials list that has to be submitted with every building permit.
But does the city have
A master
a
list?
list of critical materials that would say,
No.
okay, that triggers secondary containment, or?
We do look at it. We
Okay.
do look at that. We do look at it. And there are, and we have actually we're pretty stringent on the amount that people can store, et cetera. So, and the fire district actually looks at that very closely.
Yeah, and we do too, and I appreciate when we have concerns. It's a good working relationship between all of us, so we appreciate that. And I know the county has a list that I think they established in the late 80s or early 90s. It's very difficult to find, but it's nice to say, okay.
It's also very difficult to keep updated.
Oh, for sure. So that's it. That's all I had. I appreciate your time, and I appreciate the robust nature of the critical areas section of your code.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks for
Jeremy.
taking the time to be here.
Mr. Chairman,
Sure.
if I can, just for the minutes, I'm not convinced that's a citizen comment. That's more of a sewer and water department
Presentation.
update or briefing.
Yeah.
So I just. I'm not suggesting any action be done, but I'm just. Anybody that thinks citizen comments are. To go past 3 minutes or is it a discussion, that's not the intent.
This was informative.
I'm glad he was here.
I am too.
Yeah.
I'm very glad he was here, but
Yeah.
yeah, we could have just put him on the agenda.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
I think, and we appreciate because I allowed for the interaction between the two, but you
Very
still
helpful.
stayed under the 3 minutes, so. But I totally agree with you. If we have something like that, a presentation that might include interaction, then I think we should put it on the agenda. So thank you for being here again. Okay,
Absolutely.
thank you so much.
Absolutely. And if you see an agenda printed that you'd like to speak to, if you let me know in advance, we can just add it to the agenda at the beginning of the meeting.
That way-
Yeah, we'd love to hear more from you. Absolutely. Thank you. Then we move on to report, secretary's report.
Yeah, just briefly, so we are looking at housing policy workshop next time around. I also should have an update for you on the Parks, Recreation and Open Space Plan and the city's master facilities plan. We will, on the second meeting in February, we're gonna be doing a workshop with the sign code, and we will invite the community engagement committee to attend as well, because they may be able to help us put some information out on that as well. And again, housing policy workshop again. So housing policy is going to take us a little time. I wouldn't be surprised if we end up having to add a few more sessions on it. And so this is some of the meat and potatoes of the conflict.
Will we be letting Phil know from the hub on the sign code? He was very interested in,
So he's
That'll be-
on our stakeholders committee.
okay. So he'll already know.
Yeah, so we already have Amy's put together a handful of stakeholders.
Good. Any other report?
That is all I have. I'm doing my best to just keep up with all these meetings.
Planning Commission reports?
Well, I don't know, it's just a question. This guy here from the last meeting, there was a mitigation workshop. Is that still happening? I'm sorry, it was a GHG.
So we have the climate planning action team will be meeting actually next week. And we also have a number of stakeholder meetings for that that are planned for next week. The consultant is going to be here for 3 days. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we've got meetings each day. Amy, do you want to share what the schedule is?
Is that something that we should participate or be part of, or?
I'm gonna let the project manager
Okay.
speak to that.
No.
Okay.
The CPAT is the Climate Policy Advisory Team, so that's kind of our citizen group that's kind of ground truthing stuff. And then our workshops this month are on building and energy and transportation for greenhouse gas reduction. And we have agency folks and agency experts coming to give us their input on those things. So you guys will kind of get to review the product of all of that work.
Great, thank you.
You had me at no.
You said. Are there any other commissioner reports? If not, we'll entertain a motion for adjournment. Move to adjourn.
Second.
Commissioner Jinks. And Commissioner Garcia, second. All in favor?
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.